This is a question that has kept historians up at night. What if Mansa Musa, the great emperor of Mali, had won World War II? No, this isn't some alternate history fever dream. It's a genuine query that experts have pondered for centuries. In all seriousness, though, it's not just some whimsical curiosity. The outcome of World War II would have been catastrophic for humanity. And it's not just because Mansa Musa was an absolute badass, although he certainly was. It's because his victory would have had massive implications for the future of Africa, Europe, and the world. The story begins in 1324 when Mansa Musa, the king of the Mali Empire in West Africa, launched a jihad against the neighboring kingdom of Songhai. By 1325, Musa's forces were approaching the Atlantic coast, threatening to engulf the entire region in his growing empire. But then suddenly, without any warning, his armies stopped their advance. It's not that Mansa Musa had suddenly gone green or something. In fact, he continued to expand his empire for years to come. Instead, it appears that Mansa simply got bored. That's right. After coming so close to conquering the entire known world, he just got bored and decided to take a break from evil world domination. I mean, who can blame him? He'd been on the road for over a decade, pillaging across the countryside, sacking cities, and generally causing all kinds of mayhem. It was bound to get tiring eventually. So he called off the jihad, returned to the capital, and settled in for a long vacation. And here's where things get really weird. You see, when Mansa got back to the capital, he found that while he'd been gone, something strange had happened. The city had been visited by foreigners, people from a faraway land across the sea who'd arrived in large boats with white sails. These weren't Arabs or Indians or Chinese, but Europeans. And they were the first Europeans ever to set foot in Mali. Now, Mansa could have just ignored them, chased them out of town, and gotten back to the business of building sandcastles on the beach. But instead, he decided to do something crazy. He invited the Europeans to stay in the city and learn about the wonders of Islam. And not only that, he agreed to help them set up shop and start spreading the Islamic faith throughout their homelands. In exchange, the Europeans agreed to bring back all kinds of cool stuff from their homeland for Mansa to see, like clocks, weapons, and most importantly, books. Now you might be thinking that this sounds pretty cool, and you wouldn't be wrong. But what does it have to do with World War II? Well, as it turns out, the books that the Europeans brought back from Mali contained some pretty radical ideas that would go on to change the course of world history. One of the books that Mansa received was called the Quran, and it contained the Word of God as revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. Of course, Mansa already knew about Islam since he'd been a Muslim for years, but he hadn't actually read the Quran yet. As he read through the holy book, Mansa began to feel a sense of purpose, a sense that he was chosen by God to spread the message of Islam throughout the world. And so he did. Over the next few decades, the Mali Empire became one of the largest and most powerful empires in the history of Africa. Mansa's armies conquered vast swaths of land from the Atlantic coast to the edge of the Sahara Desert and beyond. At its peak, the Mali Empire encompassed more than half of modern-day Africa, making it the largest empire in African history. But Mansa wasn't content with just ruling over Africa. He wanted to rule over the whole world. To that end, he launched a series of military campaigns into Asia, conquering great cities like Baghdad and Damascus. By the time of Mansa's death in 1337, the Mali Empire was a true global superpower. Now, you might be wondering, how does this tie into World War II? Well, as it turns out, Mansa's conquests didn't end with his death. In fact, his empire continued to grow long after he was gone. His successors, known as the Mansa, continued to push into Asia, eventually conquering the entire Ottoman Empire. Under the rule of the Mansamadas, the Mali Empire reached its peak of wealth and power. They controlled the trans-Saharan trade routes, which brought in massive amounts of gold and salt from sub-Saharan Africa. They also controlled the Mediterranean trade routes, which brought in goods from Asia and the Middle East. The Malians used their wealth to build great mosques, universities, and libraries. They also used it to fund massive armies and navies, which allowed them to conquer new lands and protect their empire from invaders. But not everyone was happy with the Malian success. As the Mali Empire grew, it came into conflict with other powerful empires, such as the Songhai Empire and the Kingdom of Morocco. The Malians also had to contend with European powers such as Portugal and Spain, who were eager to get their hands on the riches of the Mali Empire. Despite these challenges, the Malians were able to hold on to their empire for several decades. However, in 1464, the empire was overthrown by the Songhai Empire, marking the end of the Malian dynasty. Now, you might be wondering why I've spent the last several minutes telling you about the Mali Empire if the point of this video is supposed to be World War II. Well, it's because World War II never happened. Okay, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. The thing is that the Malians' military technology was so advanced that they were able to defeat any army that challenged them. This meant that no major conflicts took place in Africa during World War II, and the European powers were too afraid to invade an African nation while Mansa Musa was in power. After all, the Malians had guns, cannons, and even tanks, which put them way ahead of the technology of their time. With the Malians controlling the Suez Canal and the major trade routes of the Mediterranean, they were in a position to cut off supplies to both sides, essentially giving them control of the war. When the Germans threatened to invade Egypt, the Malians sent an army to defend it. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, the Malians sent a fleet to intercept them. By the time the dust had settled, the Malians had defeated both the Axis and the Allied powers, winning the war for themselves. Of course, the Malians didn't know anything about the concept of winning a war without fighting, so they went ahead and did the stupid thing. They tried to occupy Europe and force the Europeans to convert to Islam, unfortunately for the Malians. The Europeans weren't exactly thrilled about this idea, so there was a lot of resistance. The Malians were ultimately unsuccessful in their attempts to conquer Europe, but they did manage to establish a foothold in North Africa, where they remained for several centuries. So what would the world look like today if the Malians had won World War II? Well, it's hard to say for sure, but it's safe to say that it would be a very different place. For one thing, Europe would likely be a Muslim-majority continent today, and the United States probably would have been colonized by the Malians long ago. Additionally, the rest of the world would probably look very different as well. If the Malians had access to advanced weaponry and technology, they could have easily conquered the rest of Africa, Asia, and Oceania. And even if they hadn't done that, their control of the Suez Canal and other trade routes would have given them massive economic and political power. In short, the world today would likely be ruled by the descendants of the Malians. And I'm not saying that this would have been a bad thing necessarily. After all, the Malians were a relatively progressive society for their time. They had a strong emphasis on education and the arts. They also had a relatively egalitarian society with little social mobility. Still, it's hard to say how things would have played out. Would the Malians have become a benevolent world government, or would they have simply become another oppressive empire? We can't know for sure, but we can be certain that the world would be a much different place today. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe for more historical tales. Thanks for watching.